What up, y'all? It's your boy Kaizen, and check this out. I made a Celarion Survivors cheat sheet for those who are looking to min-max and try to have a more satisfying build whenever you guys are playing Celarion Survivors. The anniversary minigame is gonna be with us for quite some time, and I was pretty bored, so I thought I'd whip up something like this. Basically, this cheat sheet already shows you what you can already see in a DFO. From a DFO perspective, when you get into a game, you'll be able to see your synergies just before you pick a weapon. Now, again, it's not needed, but I assume that when you click this video, you're looking for some insight, perhaps maybe some min-maxing, and that is what I'm here for. This cheat sheet is for you. Now we have all the active and passive weapons and whatever. I didn't include any of the space or the special weapons because they're like insta kill, but for synergy interactions with those special weapons, they're treated like any other active weapon. So let's get into this synergy picker. You get to choose from a selection of your active and passive skills. So for example, you can choose Electric Pillar, Asura Spirit Crescent, and Energy Magic Missile. And I haven't made the function pretty yet, so you'll be able to do some weird stuff like pick multiple Asura Spirit Crescents. But again, this is for the sake of tracking and min-maxing your minigame. So as you're unlocking stages, let's say you're stuck on stage 13 and you want to go to the next stage, but you just haven't figured out what kind of synergies will pick out because you're basically just picking whatever is offered to you, and that's fine, that's totally fine. But the beauty of this cheat sheet is that you'll be able to at least have some foresight in what you're going to be picking in your future weapons. So for example, you end up picking 3 of the 4 ranged weapons and you've only activated tier 1 of the ranged synergy. However, you're not sure if you're going to get another ranged synergy type weapon in the meantime. So maybe you could get away with a machine type synergy weapon or maybe a melee type synergy, in which case you could probably start farming for or start looking for 2 other melee synergies, so that way you can unlock at least the tier 1 for it. Another good thing about this cheat sheet is that you'll be able to figure out how to come up with a few example builds. I'm sure a lot of people have already come up with their own favorite build. These are a few of mine. I like the melee / fire build. It's pretty good all throughout the game when you're starting to collect weapons, when you're finalizing it, and especially when hordes of monsters start to surround you. The shield that you get from the melee synergy is very useful, and as you get more and more stats, the HP regen will also help heal you up while keeping that shield intact. That's like a little bit of protection while keeping you healthy. You could replace Fire Orb with some other fire trait like Ammunition if you want to buff up your Needle Throw, because Needle Throw is by itself, it's pretty good, especially if you have projectile, interval, and ranged synergy. But alas, we also have a tier 2 fire synergy. This one deals 5% of the monster's HP, and they are affected, all types of monsters are affected by fire. The boss and the named monsters, and of course the low-level monsters. And for the melee build, all 4 melee weapons they pass through the enemies, making for a really good wave clear. And with Suju Inferno specifically, you can kind of leave out a trail for them as you're trying to kite them. And you could probably manipulate your nuclear punches if you can get the timing down, if you can get the cadence for when nuclear punch starts throwing, so you can move forward and then look back. If let's say you're kiting a boss, you would walk a little bit forward and leave out bits of Suju Inferno. And the good thing about that weapon is that it stacks. So each Suju Inferno flame will deal damage to whoever steps on it, which I thought was pretty cool. With the range water build, that's your standard survival type minigame build. You just let out a bunch of range type weapons. Well, in our case, we only have 4 types, but the amount of mayhem that they cause is pretty good. You have 2 strong ranged weapons in the form of Needle Throw and Asura Spirit Crescent. Spirit Crescent passes through enemies, and the projectile doesn't disappear based on the amount of enemies hit, but rather distance. And it's a pretty good early game. Actually, the Spirit Crescent is pretty good in all stages of the game because it opens up paths for you to take and get the XP gems, and also it controls the mob, and since it targets the closest monster in your area, you'll be able to bulldoze through a certain section with the rest of your ranged weapons. Needle Throw has the highest DPS out of any weapon, in my opinion. Just the sheer amount of projectiles that you can fire from Needle Throw alone, plus the projectile count, plus the projectile interval, and the range synergy, it might as well be a machine gun at this point. And then you also have water synergy. This is only the tier 1 slow, so it's not gonna be much, but it will do the job because you have everything else firing in all directions. You got Wild Shot, you got Grand Shatter, Asura Spirit Crescent, and Needle Throw firing in all directions, and they fire at such quick intervals that the slow, if the target happens to be still alive after a barrage of projectiles, if they happen to still be alive, the water will put up that permanent slow on them. And again, we have a fire synergy on top of that, so that the fire is applied on all the targets that are affected by your projectiles, and since the fire synergy persists for a few seconds, it will also apply the slow from the water synergy, which I thought was pretty cool. And as a cherry on top, you have a 2-piece tier 1 light synergy for some nice crit. I've also included in this cheat sheet some interactions and tips that has to do with specific passives like projectile intervals, or with the ranged synergy that increases projectiles, or with magnifying glass or the projectile area stat. You can see that there are some weapons that interact really well with these kinds of stats. Like for example, Ice Sword isn't affected by projectile interval, or it's not considered to be a projectile at all, but it will increase the size of your projectile area. Conversely, with Needle Throw, for example, all of it projectile interval, increasing the projectile count and increasing the projectile area size, is also affected by, or Needle Throw is affected by all 3 of them. There are some exclusions that may not, like for example, some of these weapons are described in the active weapon as projectiles, like Spiral Nen for example, but projectile interval doesn't affect the spiral, and then like it won't spin faster. And if you have the range synergy, the one that increases projectile count, it won't increase the number of spiral nen that will surround you. I'm not sure about the projectile area. I think it just increases ever so slightly. I don't think they want huge orbs circling the player, but I guess there should be like a question mark. But for the most part, everything else holds up to what they do. I've also included the type of damage that each of these weapons do. For example, ranged weapons like Needle Throw and Wild Shot and Enhanced Magic Missile only do single target damage, whereas Asura Spirit Crescent is a ranged projectile weapon that does piercing damage. It will not disappear after reaching a certain amount of targets damage, but it will disappear after reaching a certain distance. And then we also have Murder's Wave and Spiral Nen that kind of just persist there. They don't really move, well, they move with you. I've also put Ice Sword down as a persisting active weapon. It's kind of just there in front of you. Nuclear Punch, you could say it's like a persisting weapon, but it's more so like a Sewer Spirit Crescent, where it's a projectile that pierces through enemies. So with these kinds of weapons, you'll be able to tell which ones actually pass through enemies and be able to apply its damage throughout a location. That's where these area weapons come in. Flame Tornado, Isaiah, Electric Pillar. They're kind of like projectiles, but sometimes they're stationary, like Isaiah. These ones are definitely affected by projectile intervals. In the case of Returning Sniper, the interval is how often the returning sniper shoots their shot. With I'm not sure about Raptor. I think for Raptors, they kind of just stay there until the target is dead, and then that's when they switch. I didn't notice any damage uptime when it comes to projectile interval. Like, for example, if I got increase in projectile interval, I didn't notice if the Raptor damage was doing more ticks per second or something like that. Same thing with Murderous Wave, although I know for a fact that it is affected by projectile area. Here's some more interactions that I've found out in the amount of games that I've played so far. I found out that the fire synergy also applies to slow from water, and the fire can execute if you have shadow active. If you also have the magic synergy activated, the interval is every 30 seconds. And unfortunately, projectile interval doesn't decrease the magic interval. I mean, it wouldn't make sense, but I thought it'd be nice. And unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And as for the machine explosion synergy, the machine explosion can't crit. I meant to write this down. This cannot crit. Cannot crit. But it does apply the fire and water synergy. The only monster that isn't affected by the slow from the water synergy is the boss, which is the one with the purple aura. And the fire and shadow orb, the ones that increase your attack, and fire orb increases your attack and shadow orb increases your damage against bosses and named monsters. They do not affect the damage that you deal with synergy damage, like the fire 8% HP damage or the machine explosion damage. They're not affected by those damage modifiers. And also, the weapon type damage doesn't affect the synergy of the same type. So for example, Service Kit, when Service Kit is a machine type passive, it increases machine type weapons damage, but Service Kit does not increase the damage of the machine synergy, which is dealing 5, 10 or 20 damage upon monster death. It doesn't increase that damage, unfortunately. And for a little bit more min-maxing, there is a way to manipulate the pool size. For those who haven't figured it out yet, everyone has 5 slots for active and passive weapons, and if you're looking for a specific type of weapon, then you would want to rush to get 5 unique active weapons. That way you will not be given any more active weapon offerings that are unique to what you have chosen already. So let's say you pick these 5 weapons already, and that will fill up all 5 weapon slots. Then all you will see is either passives or the 5 active weapons that you haven't fully maxed out yet. Same goes for passives. If you picked out 5 and you want to look for active weapons, then you will certainly do so. And to reduce the pool size further, let's say you're looking for a specific passive, but the chances of finding a passive out of the entire pool is extremely high. Maxing out a certain weapon or a certain passive will completely get rid of it from the pool. So let's say out of all these weapons, you're looking for a Sewer Spirit Crescent, and in order to do that, you want to try to get a weapon maxed out so that Ice Sword is no longer being offered, and your chances of finding a Sewer Spirit Crescent is more likely. Same goes for passives. Out of the combined pool of active and passive weapons. Maxing out an active or passive weapon will allow you to reduce the pool size. Of course, this is all easy said and done if RNG is not a factor here, but this is assuming, of course, that the kind of active and passive weapons that you're looking for are pretty forgiving, which is another plus for the synergy picker right here. Let's say you were going for a melee build, but you were only able to activate tier 1, then you could probably pivot off to a different build and still have a more or less unified and solid synergy until you get to the late game. And if I'm sure you guys already know by now after playing so many games since the anniversary started, but the ultimate weapon only shows up when all 5 of the chosen active and passive weapons have been maxed out. Speaking of maxing out weapons, the priority that I like to do when it comes to playing Celarion Survivors is, granted that I'm given the choice, is to max out the active weapons first. Maxing out the active weapons increases the base damage of said active, and then we follow it up with percent damage modifiers. If you have weapon type synergy passives, or the fire orb that increases attack, or the shadow orb that increases attack. When you're fighting named and boss monsters, you want to max out your active weapons first. Of course, out of all the active weapons that you have, max out the weapon that deals consistent damage. If out of your 5 weapons is the returning sniper, then you wouldn't want to max that out first, because the chances of that weapon working in your favor is pretty slim. Whereas something like Spiral Nen or Ice Sword, they deal consistent damage, and maxing that out makes more sense compared to maxing out Returning Sniper. And when it comes to synergies or damage modifiers, you want to max out the passive that gives you consistent damage. So again, you want to max out your weapon type passive. So for example, if I'm running a melee weapon build, then if I find Sheath, Shadow Orb, and Fire Orb, I can choose to max out either the Fire Orb, which increases attack, that has little to no condition, that has 0 conditions at all, or the weapon type damage passive, which again, its only condition is that you have a melee weapon in your arsenal. So I would max those 2 first, and then I will max out Shadow Orb, because named and boss monsters don't appear as frequently as they do. They appear at select intervals, and the Fire Orb and the weapon synergy, the weapon type damage, will give you damage right away, assuming that it matches the same weapon that you have. It'll give you damage already, and that damage will be consistent depending on regardless of the monster that you fight, whether it's the lesser monsters, the named, or even the boss monsters. And then after that, I prioritize the utility, the last stuff like movement speed or HP regen. I like to max those out because they're not as important as the ones that I've mentioned in the beginning. There are specific use cases where you would prioritize the utility, or like for example, if you have a fat melee shield bubble and you need to recover a lot of HP right now, but your damage is still okay, then you would upgrade Mechanical Heart. Or if all the XP gems are too far away from you, but there is a named monster in front of you and you need to level up right away, then getting the Shadow Orb would make sense. Yeah, that's how I would prioritize maxing out the weapons, both active and passive. And before I close out this video, I want to give out some super niche, very specific synergies that I found entertaining. One example would be the Suju Inferno with the water synergy, and also the winged boots, the ones that increase your movement speed. So with Suju Inferno, you get to lay down flames where if an enemy steps on it, they take damage until the fire disappears. So what you can do is increase the length of the flames that you can leave out with movement speed via wing boots, and you can keep them in the fire longer via the slow from the water synergy. I thought that was a pretty cool interaction. Another interaction that I thought that was pretty cool was another cool interaction that I found out that was sort of interesting is Isaiah. If you've done the Isaiah weapon, I'm sure you've noticed that some of the Isaiah are stacked on top of each other, like there's an overlap to it. Unfortunately, the damage does not stack with each Isaiah. However, it does make sure that if you it extends the area that Isaiah can damage, and that one was it was a little underwhelming. I thought it would be exciting to find out that the damage would stack that way, but alas. Since Styre AMR is considered a machine weapon, it also counts as a projectile, meaning if you happen to have the ranged projectile, the ranged synergy activated, it will increase the amount of projectiles that can home in on targets, and the projectile area affects it, but not in the way that you think. But the Styre AMR is affected by projectile area when it explodes. So what's cool about it is that Styre AMR has a lingering explosion, where if monsters happen to walk towards it post explosion, there's probably like a split second or two where the explosion lingers long enough and that they'll be able to take damage from it. And of course, since it's a weapon, the fire and water synergies also apply to it. So if they happen to not die in the first explosion, they will be slowed by the water synergy, and they will take the HP damage per second from the fire synergy. I know I rambled off a bit, but Celarion Survivors got me acting up. I understand that this is just a mini game and there's not that many weapons to choose from, but overall the interactions were pretty cool. Combining different kinds of weapons were pretty cool, and I guess I'm a sucker for these kinds of things. It's your boy Kaizen. I have the link down below for those who want to check out the cheat sheet. You guys can download it and play around with the cheat sheet. Let me know if you got some really cool builds that works for you, and that's all I have. Oh, before I forget, one build that has been consistent for me when it comes to the hidden stage is the melee fire build. It's very tanky, and it will keep you alive in moments where you don't think it will. And the shield refresh is also pretty neat. You'll be able to get out of most named monster mobs, or if you happen to get trapped in the enemy projectiles, the melee shield is very, very strong. And then you pair that with a water orb that increases your max HP, you'll be able to outlast the hidden stage boss. Another build that I found out was okay in my opinion was the needle throw build. You can buff up all the synergies that needle throw needs, like increasing the slow from the water synergy and increasing your ranged synergy all the way to tier 3. But the only caveat is that needle throw doesn't penetrate. The projectile doesn't pierce through targets, so you kind of have to wait until the first target has been destroyed before needle throw moves on. So for example, if there are named monsters that are blocking for the boss, you'll have to shred through the named monster before you get to him. Although I will admit it is pretty satisfying because it's practically a machine gun. That's all I have for today. I hope you guys have been enjoying the Celarion Survivors minigame, and by now, I'm sure everyone has unlocked all the active and passives. So not only are we surviving here, we are thriving. Catch you guys in the next one. Peace.